80, 79, Swami Kriyananda created, among the many rounds of his creative work, a system for training people in the spiritual life, which he called superconscious living. Sometimes we just refer to it as SCL. You have a beautiful name like superconscious living and you reduce it to meaningless acronyms, but anyway, there you have it. And during the period of time that he created this, he was extremely determined that it really brought to one focus all the wide variety of teachings. And that one focus was very simple, which is that we live with two possibilities in our incarnation. One is that we are drawn upward into what is our true nature in the superconscious connection we have with the infinite, or we are pulled backwards to our present identification with personality, ego, body, all the events that happen to us, and that we cling to that and constantly try to recreate whatever it is that we desire by the same building blocks that we already have, and are resistant to this more radical understanding, which is that the whole premise of our search for happiness and our desire to escape suffering is the problem. We also have the conscious mind, the conscious level. We tend to think of consciousness in three levels: superconscious, subconscious, and conscious. But the conscious level, which is our normal waking state that we are now, is not really in itself a state of consciousness. It is merely the battleground where the inclination towards superconscious and the habit towards subconscious meet. And so our daily struggle, our minute-by-minute struggle, is a really very simple one, which is, will I define my life and experience it in terms of my superconscious potential and my oneness with the Spirit, or will I define it in terms of the ephemeral, which is the body I'm living in now, the relationships I have, the problems that this creates? And will I also believe that it's a time-oriented struggle in order to get there? That's the basic subject we're talking about now. When Swami Kriyananda created the superconscious living system, we had a huge event at the Palace of Fine Arts in, I think it was 1979 now, and we built up to it by having a lot of lecture tours throughout the whole Bay Area, and then had this almost 1,000 people in that hall for a 3-day event, as I recall. And part of what gave credibility to it is we had various individuals with good stories to tell, to stand up and talk about their experiences with superconsciousness and with this way of living. And one of the men who spoke was a man named Mike Hebel, who I believe eventually, he was a policeman at that time, I believe he became head of the detective department in San Francisco, whatever his role was. And he was a meditator and a devotee of this spiritual path. And he told this story of using these techniques in a situation that most of us can hardly imagine unless we do that kind of work. He was a policeman in the Tenderloin in the Mission District. I guess the mission's been revised since then, but whatever you would call the area where there were a lot of drug dealers, a lot of alcoholics, a lot of unsavory characters. And he was in pursuit of a man who was a reputed drug dealer, and he had to pursue him into some very decrepit hotel building, and with very narrow hallways leading off into a lot of rooms. And Michael had to go through those hallways looking for this man. And Michael is an armed policeman, and the man that they were chasing they knew to be dangerous. And somehow or another, Michael came around a corner and met the man he was looking for, and the man was holding a shotgun like this. And the shotgun was pointed right at Michael's chest, just like that. And the man himself was clearly under the influence of God knows what. And his eyes were sort of rolling around in his head. And just suddenly, Michael, who was in his early 30s at that point, is standing just with this crazy man, a drugged crazy man, with a loaded shotgun pointing right at his chest. I mean, of course he was trained to do this, but he was also trained as a yogi. And he said he just simply, in that moment, all other realities ceased to exist for him. Every other possibility that could enter his mind, by the training that he had in meditation, he was able to simply push away from his mind absolutely everything except where he was standing right in this moment. And then even as he was standing there, he said, he reduced everything in that moment to the simple fact of his own breath. And he said it was a powerful incentive because he thought each one might be the last one he ever had. So he was going to savor each one as long as they lasted. Then he says, without really any other thoughts in his mind, excuse me, I have to get my throat clear. Without any other thoughts in his mind, he breathed in and he breathed out, and he watched the breath come in and he watched the breath come out, and he just stared at this man with no other context. And he said he breathed maybe 10 times. The guy's holding the gun like this with his finger on the trigger, and finally, without any words being spoken, the man just put the gun down, Michael took it from him, and that was the end of the whole incident. And he said quite simply, in that moment, I moved into the superconscious realm in which all of the realities of my body, my life, my hopes, my relationships, my career, all of it, what difference does it make in such a moment? But the power of what he was saying was not only his ability in that moment to go there, but the effect it had on everything else. Because everything in this world is run from the superconscious level, and we're always trying to make it work by cutting up all these pieces and putting them back together without asking ourselves, what's the source of this? There's another story I was told, I read in a book by I think his name is Tom Brown. He's well known as the Tracker. He was trained by American Indians. He's a Caucasian person who grew up in New Jersey, but his childhood was spent with a full-blooded American Indian man who trained him in Indian methods. And as a child, he and his friends used to run pretty wild in some area of New Jersey that was still, at that time, quite undeveloped. And pretty much everything about that area was okay, except there were a lot of packs of wild dogs. He said people in the area, if they had pets and they didn't want to keep them anymore, often released their dogs into that wild area. And as a result, there was a pack of wild dogs. So when he and his friends would play, there was always this genuinely dangerous element that they always had to think about. And one time, Tom was there by himself in those woods, and somehow or another he got himself in a very difficult position with that pack of wild dogs, and they were in fact pursuing him, and he was unable to elude them. And they chased him up to a hilltop, and he found himself with these dogs who were more than capable of killing him. He was just a child, I believe, at the time. The dogs were rushing at him, and he realized that there was nothing in the context of ordinary life that was going to save him. So without even the thought of saving himself, but simply realizing there was no other alternative, he said he sat down on a log and did what his Indian mentor had told him to do, which was essentially to just leave this world and go into the realm of the spirit. So he became perfectly still. We would say he went into meditation. But he became conscious of another dimension and lost contact with this one. And he stayed in that dimension for a period of time until he felt to come out of it again. And then when he looked around, the dogs were gone. Now, he's one who was trained also to read tracks. So all these dogs had been around him, so he went and looked at the tracks. He saw what the animals had done. They had pursued him up the hill, they had rushed right to where he was, and as soon as they got within feet of him, he saw that they lost the scent. And they became utterly confused as to where he was. And he saw their tracks, they milled about, they went here, they went there, they tried to figure out what to do, and then they finally just left in confusion. because he had simply disappeared from this plane of reality, even though his body was still right there. They couldn't even smell him. Isn't that extraordinary? Now I'm reminded of a friend of mine, Ananda, who is Gary's older brother, who was a well-known character at Ananda. He lived for many years as the leader of the Ananda Sacramento colony. Now he lives at Ananda Village. When Ananda Sacramento first bought the apartment complex that they have now turned into a beautiful community, it was a unique fixer-upper, which means that the buildings were utterly decrepit and inhabited by people who had migrated to a place of very low consciousness. And so they had to go through this process of moving out of that apartment complex. A lot of these transient people who were simply not at all in tune, they actually had working drug dealers in their apartment complex when they took it over. And gradually people saw the handwriting on the wall and moved out, but some were very angry at being displaced, even though they were transient by nature and no one had lived there very long. And so this one man, finally, they gave him an eviction notice for being an active drug dealer, which wasn't really what they wanted to have in their community. And this man was so angry, he burst into the community office where Ananda was, and he had a drawn gun, and he pointed it right at him. Ananda, in that moment, just leaving all ordinary concerns, he didn't go into a state of meditation, he stayed right engaged, but he made the choice. He opened his chest, he's a very big man, he opened his chest, he said, "Go ahead and shoot me, but you're still going to have to move out." Now, when I was thinking about all of this, I was realizing, in this battleground, and this is the Battle of Kurukshetra. The Bhagavad Gita takes place on a battleground. You have the Pandavas who represent the superconscious reality. You have the Kauravas who represent materialism, the subconscious reality. The Battle of Kurukshetra, which is a war unto the death, is between these two armies, and it takes place right inside of us. Many, many things happen in our lives that disturb us, that cause us to feel suffering, that make us feel anxious about whether or not we're going to be able to deal with this, that confuse us as to what the right course of action is. Life rarely progresses in this sort of ordinary, happy, straight line. If you have a lifetime like that, you might as well enjoy it, because the next one's going to be different. You can pretty much depend on that. Because we always are going to eventually, we're going to have to work out this conflict between the desire for the comfort of the known, for the small, for the familiar, above all for the easy. Whenever something is difficult, we always call that bad, don't we? When things don't go exactly as we want them to go, we call that bad. I mean, in the course of our lives, living at Ananda, we've been through so many ups and downs. We had 12 years of litigation that was just absolutely unrelenting, that was coming from sources outside of our community that were just determined, absolutely determined, that we not be allowed to continue as we are, that we didn't have a right to represent Yogananda, that Yogananda is owned by other people, and who did we think we were? And it just goes on and on and on. And these are not situations in which we can all just sit around the table and come to peace. I remember many years ago, David and I had a disagreement with people who are really our close friends and still are. But we had a very serious disagreement about some of the things, the decisions we had made and the decisions they thought we should have made. And David and I thought, we can just solve this. So we went to dinner at their house and we just said, let's just talk this out. So we asked them to really speak frankly to us. My goodness, what they thought of us was so much worse than anything we'd ever imagined. It was all a misunderstanding, but it was not a misunderstanding that just pure smiles and goodwill was going to solve. And eventually it solved itself. We laughed when we left that house. Well, let's not ask the next time. Let's just live in blissful ignorance. And well-meaning people of goodwill were simply convinced of their point of view. This happens for many reasons. We have our own karmic filters through which we see things. We also have memories of past lives in which, in fact, we may have been as awful as other people think we are now. And it's not always easy to tell, what's changed, what's different. I was in a situation with a woman who was a friend, but we didn't like each other at all. I say she was a friend because we shared ideals, we shared life commitment, we shared life purpose, we shared spiritual practices. We're guru bhais, but we didn't like each other very much. It's an odd thing on the spiritual path. And I had a dream, which was a true dream, I believe, even Swami confirmed it, of really, really bad things that she had done to me in a previous lifetime. I mean, Gothic proportion bad things, the stuff of good movies. And I dreamt through it, and I really felt it was true. Even in the dream, I have to admit, I wasn't angry at the end of the dream because I felt all the difficulties had led to good purpose. Well, I didn't tell her about that dream, but somehow she heard about it. So she went to a well-known psychic in the area and found out what I did to her, which was pretty reprehensible, nothing to be proud of. So we were pretty much even like that at this point. I mean, we're arguing about things that happened centuries ago. You have to be really into reincarnation to get that confused, but we did like that. And we were, at odds, not with our fists, but in our self-righteous indignation. Finally, Swamiji called us both together, and he just cut through it so beautifully. He said, maybe everything that you've heard is true. And he essentially said, and I'm inclined to believe it is, but neither of you would ever behave in that way again. You've changed. You've gone forward. You've extricated yourself from your subconscious. You're living more by your superconscious. We can't really demand that people conform to a reality that isn't even their reality anymore. Now, this is what Jesus is talking to us about in this particular passage. We have this thought that things will get better someday, that right now I'm really not quite good enough, but soon I may be. But Jesus tries to break us of that whole thought that all of these subconscious realities are truer than our superconscious realities. I was laughing once with a friend of mine, Naidruva, who's an American black woman, and she's a little bit older than I. She was a real trailblazer in a lot of desegregation elements. She went to Harvard. She was the first black woman in Harvard Law School, and even when hardly any women went, and in her high school and all through her life, she was right at the front. And after she finished law school, she went to work for Martin Luther King for a while. So she was really steeped in that reality, very nobly in that reality. I was born in a Jewish family, so we would often talk about prejudiced things. Then she started talking to me about, I don't know what the context was, but it was about a woman whose father was black and mother was white, and how the woman had to live through her life. And I just said so emphatically, well, heaven, she's as much white as she is black. Why doesn't she just live in the white world? And she let that just sit there for a while and just stared at me, because it shows on her face, because other people are going to hold her to that particular identity. Oh yeah. It's not just how we determine it, it's also how everyone else in the world perceives it. Now, what we're working with now in our spiritual life is that we're half and half at best. We feel half and half. We have all this subconscious reality that we have to protect, and then we have this longing for this superconscious reality. But we have this strong prejudice. We have this strong prejudice in favor of the subconscious. And we allow ourselves, just as that half and half woman was forced by society to identify one specific way because of the way her face looked, we're bound by incarnations of habit to hold ourselves to all of these subconscious ideas. Something difficult happens, we feel we have to be unhappy. Someone dies, we feel we have to grieve. Someone insults us, we feel we have to fight back. Some enormous, seemingly insoluble problem comes that just has tentacles that go in all directions, and every way we look, we don't know what to do. We feel we have to worry. We just feel obligated to worry. Someone comes at us with a gun, and we have to think, oh, I have to be afraid. I mean, Ananta's response was just, I I contemplate that a great deal. Go ahead and shoot me, but it's not going to solve your problem. You know, just like in the now, if my life is taken away, what difference does it make? Are we that free? We're so prejudiced in favor of our subconscious. Jesus says to us, you think you have to plant the seeds and wait till it comes, but you don't understand. All you have to do is lift up your eyes. And he's giving us something so subtle in the superconscious living classes that Swami Kriyananda taught. He talked about the 3 positions of the eyes. Some of yoga comes down to such a simple reality. Whenever we fall asleep, our eyes fall. When we sink into subconsciousness. As a public speaker, I am in the unusual position of watching people fall asleep, which is not something everyone gets to do. And I watch them struggle against falling asleep. Fortunately, they don't fall asleep really often, but they do. People come in, well, for many reasons they fall asleep. They come in at the end of a long day's work, I'll say that much. And I watch them like this, and then their eyes just fall like that. One man was talking about driving, and he was very sleepy, and he began to think he could rest one eye at a time. Crossed his mind that he better pull off the highway before he found himself in the astral world just by accident. But when we go into subconsciousness, represented primarily by sleep, but subconscious is everything that identifies us with limitation. When we fall asleep is when we really shrink our identity only to our own world. Isn't that so? You can have dreams when you're asleep, and everybody you know can be in those dreams, but they won't know it. Because you're just making it up. You can have a reality that somebody came to kill you. I had this dream once where a good friend of mine picked up a big hatchet and just cut my head off like that, in a kind of friendly way. It was his job to do it. It was his job to do it. It was my job to have it done. You know, okay, just go ahead, whack, like that. It was actually a very pleasant dream because I just sailed away completely happily. But he didn't know it. He wasn't there. I told him about it later, and he assured me that he had no such intentions. I never thought he did. But the more subconscious we become, the more our world is defined by our own ideas about it. People who drink a lot or at all activate the subconscious. That's what's so bad about drinking. You think that you're having such a good time. You think you're so clever, you're so smart, you do all these things, but if you see a video of yourself, you're just terribly embarrassed by what you see. This is what's wrong with marijuana and LSD and all those things. They put you in this huge universe of your own making. You just think you're so wise and you're having such a good time, and you're just sitting there staring at a plastic bag. It's just like nothing is happening. It's all diminished. It's not expanded, it's all diminished. That's what subconscious is diminished, represented by sleep. And whenever we begin to go towards subconscious, our eyes always drop. Isn't that what we do when a problem comes to us, which is more than we can handle? We just feel really bad about it. Isn't that so? Just imagine, think about it right in this moment, some seemingly insoluble problem, and your eyes drop, don't they? We sink into this impossible reality. Conscious level, we're looking straight forward most of the time. Sometimes we're shifting from side to side, but we're more or less on the horizontal plane. We're just trying to look out at things as they are. But when superconsciousness comes to us, even just to say the word, what do? Our eyes go up. Because where we're looking down to the lower chakras, we're just going outward to the senses, or we're looking up to the spiritual eye. And when we're looking at the spiritual eye, we're not going backwards into the forehead. As Sri Teshwar said, the spiritual path is challenging enough without trying to do it cross-eyed. You know, we're not going here like this. We're looking there. We're looking above the horizon line. We're looking where we're going. We're literally, this is where the ego is the medulla, and the medulla is the straight out through the eyes. We lift it. We move the energy from the medulla to the spiritual eye. And when we see that reality, we're seeing where it all comes from. And more than that, we're seeing where it all resolves into bliss. You know, the astonishing thing about this story being you, me, and everybody else here, is that it has a happy ending. I mean, it has a happy ending. A mathematician friend of mine said, I was an atheist when I started studying math, and I became a devotee of God the more I studied it. Because even in mathematics, he said, If the answer isn't beautiful and harmonious, it's not the right answer. He said, because it all resolves into harmony and wholeness and beauty. And if we haven't gotten there, we're not finished yet. In the subconscious, it doesn't resolve because we're all isolated and these people really do wish me ill. In fact, their opinion of me is far worse than I can even imagine. These things really do happen. We can't make resolution just by trying to pretend it's all nice. Let's all get around the table and talk. Swami Kriyananda rarely allows us to sort of share our points of view like this. His point of view is go towards superconsciousness, lift your eyes up into the light of the divine, and from that perspective we begin to realize, oh, we're just souls on our way to the infinite, and I have this karma right now. This is my personal challenge, is to not allow this, whatever it might be, this disappointment, this ill health, this low energy, this mistreatment, this betrayal, this treachery, this weakness within myself, to not allow it to define me. But even now, in this moment, lift mine eyes up into the hills, as they put it in the psalm. Lift my eyes up into the light, where even now the fields, as he said, the field of your consciousness is white and ready for harvest. It's a very, very direct reference. Literally, when you find yourself sinking into anything other than calm, joyful acceptance, or at least calm acceptance, preferably joyful acceptance of whatever's happening to you, lift your eyes. Even now the fields are ripe and ready to be harvested. Sometimes we try to escape from karma merely by outlasting it. You know, something bad happens and we freeze into subconsciousness and we figure if we just stay there long enough, maybe our enemies will die. And sometimes they do, or we die, but we don't escape from anything. We freeze at whatever state of consciousness we are, and we literally just postpone it. Swami Kriyananda says when karma comes in a wave, and the wave is this big, if we can rise and meet it right at the crest, then we have conquered all karma of that dimension. What most people do is the wave comes high like this, and then gradually over time it gets smaller. Because energy dissipates, people go away, intensity diminishes, and then we say, oh, I'm over it. But what we're over is this. We're over something a quarter of an inch high, and the next time the karma comes, and not only will it be worse, or it won't actually be worse, but it'll feel worse. It'll feel bigger, because instead of expanding to meet it, we shrank and hoped it would go away, so the next time it comes, the response we've trained ourselves in is smaller. Be as conscious of something so simple as the position of your eyes. When your mood slips, when your courage slips, when your energy slips, lift your eyes. And in that moment, as soon as you lift your eyes, you see, you're in superconsciousness. You're moving towards superconsciousness. And not only are you then also in the position of influencing, you've extricated yourself from all this bondage of delusion, and you have put yourself in touch with where you're really going, which is the whole point anyway, and you have also brought into you a power that in itself will transform anything. Michael Hebel standing there, a loaded shotgun in the hands of a crazy man right in front of him, he just looked right at him, and all he paid attention to was the in and out flow of his breath. Just forget everything. I may be on my way to the astral world anyway, so let me just think about where I want to be and who I really am. And in that moment, this is what Jesus and all the masters tell us, in that moment, God is there. All these other things may also be going on, but wouldn't you rather experience them in the company of the divine than huddled all by yourself waiting to be rescued? It's always there, even now. The fields are ripe to harvest, and all that is needed is for us to go and reap the benefit of that divine presence.